My name is Jenny Laurie, and I work at Housing Court Answers. Housing Court Answers runs the information tables in the city's housing courts, and we give people without lawyers help who have cases in housing court. We help people fill out forms, we help people who are in non-payment cases prevent eviction, and we do a number of other things to help people get settled in housing court and get their cases settled or get help with back rent. One of the things we also do is we help people who are trying to file cases for harassment. I have a couple of things on the table over there that explain a little bit about the harassment law, and I'm just going to go through it a little bit. But before I do, can I have just a show of hands how many people in the room are rent stabilized tenants? Do you know? And how many people live in like subsidized or public housing? I'm sorry? Okay. Oh, what? All right. And how many people live in unregulated housing? No, not rent stabilized, not rent controlled, not public housing, not senior housing, not. Anybody here?
Would you break down what you're asking, what they mean?
Yes. And how many people like just in a one or a two family house? Right. And a bunch of you didn't raise your hand. Do you know where you live? Two-family house. Okay, all right. So most of you are in some sort of regulated system. Okay. So there's a city law that allows tenants to file harassment actions in housing court against their landlord if the landlord is trying to do something to make the tenant move out. And you can do it just the way you do an HP action. And an HP action is, HP stands for housing card, and it's a special action that tenants can file in housing court to get the landlord to make repairs. And about 7 or 8 years ago, the law was amended so that tenants can file an action not just for repairs but also for harassment. And over on the table there, I put a sample copy of the form that tenants have to fill out in order to start that kind of action. And it's a difficult proceeding to do, and it's much easier if you have a lawyer, number one, or number two, if you have a group. So if there's a group of tenants in the building that are all suffering from harassment, it's much easier to pursue this kind of case in housing court if you have a group of tenants. The qualifications for this kind of case are, number one, the landlord you have to have some evidence or proof that the landlord is trying to get you to move out. Right? So that's the most important thing. You have to be able to show that the landlord is not just being rude to you or doing bad things to you, but also that the landlord wants you to move out of your apartment. And in most situations, this is a tenant who's being pressured to move out of a rent-regulated apartment, particularly a rent-stabilized or rent-controlled apartment.
Right.
And the other thing that you need to show is that the landlord is doing something to interfere with your ability to live in the apartment. So the landlord is denying you essential services. So the landlord isn't providing heat or hot water or one of those other basic conditions that you're required.
What about doubling the rent?
Or just a second. Or that the landlord has other serious conditions that the landlord knows about and isn't fixing, like a cascading leak or broken windows or other kinds of really serious conditions. Another activity that landlords do that you can use as proof in this kind of case is if the landlord has done something with your door, is remove the door, remove the lock on the door, or fix the lock or the door so that it doesn't work. And then finally, the landlord has done something to move your stuff out. So, like the landlord has come in and moved your furniture out, or just, come into your apartment and taken stuff out of your apartment and put it in the hall or out on the street. So you have to have those two different things, right, in order to do a case in housing court for harassment. So one, you have to show that the landlord wants you to get out of your apartment, and the other that he's done something to make it impossible or really hard to live in your apartment. So as I said before, we have information tables in the housing courts. Our information table in Manhattan Housing Court is on the second floor in the clerk's office of 111 Center Street. And for those of you who live in 10035 or 37, we have an information table outside the clerk's office in the Harlem Community Justice Center. And in both of those courts, you can file one of these actions. You need to go to the clerk's office first and get the forms. And it's a 5-part form. And as I said, I made copies of a sample of the forms that you fill out to do this action. You have to fill out all of the forms, and then you have to submit it to a judge for the judge's signature. And once the judge signs the papers, you then have to serve the papers on the landlord and on the city's housing department in order to start the case. You'll get a date for an inspection, and you'll get a date to come back to court for your hearing. And on the hearing date, the judge will decide whether there's been harassment and will order the landlord, if you have violations, will order the landlord to fix the violation. So if you have broken windows or no heat or hot water, those kinds of conditions, the judge will order the landlord to fix those conditions. And if you can prove that there was harassment, the judge can also place a violation for the harassment, can fine the landlord, and the fine goes to the city, not to you. So don't think you're going to get rich out of this. The judge can also order the landlord to stop harassing you. So that's basically the way that kind of case works. As I said in the beginning, they're very difficult, and you need proof of those different kinds of harassment. So I think we'll take questions at the end. Yes, yeah, that makes sense. Okay. So if people have questions about that kind of proceeding, as I said, I put over there a full sample of the form that you have to use to start this kind of case, as well as information about how to contact us for help in filling out the forms, and a short piece that Legal Aid put together that explains in very simple terms what harassment is and what you can do about it.
Do you have our brochures here for the AG's office? I'll bring some.
In the other room? Oh, yeah, I didn't bring anything. Thank you.
Excuse me. Just taking a tenant to court for no reason, is that considered harassment?
Baseless. Yes, sorry, I left that out. Baseless. Repeatedly taking a tenant to court for non-payment of rent in baseless cases, or a holdover is baseless. Yes.
What can be done about that?
Well, you can file a harassment case. That's one of the grounds for harassment.
Okay. Question. What about?
But I think we're gonna do questions at the very end, because we're all talking about different kinds of harassment and different methods, and we'll wait until you hear the whole gamut. Yeah.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Buenos dias. My name is Jessica Addy. I work with the New York State Attorney General. For the new people who came in, is there anybody else who needs a headset? ¿Hay alguien que necesite traducción?
Para aquellos nuevos que necesitan los headsets, que no hablan el idioma, tenemos headsets de
Okay. Well, thank you for coming here today. As I said, I work with the New York Attorney General's office. We enforce local, state, and federal laws that protect the rights of tenants from discrimination and from harassment. We don't represent individual tenants, but we do take action against landlords who we believe are taking illegal actions or discriminating against tenants in violation of those laws. And in the last year or so, we've become increasingly concerned about what we see with greater frequency, the pattern that we see with greater frequency of landlords harassing tenants to try to get them out of rent-stabilized housing so that they can then deregulate that apartment and begin charging market rents. And we believe it's really critical to take action against landlords who are harassing tenants or violating the law in any other way. And I want to just tell you about the types of harassment that what we've been seeing, so that you can tell us if you believe that that type of thing is occurring where you live, or you know somebody else who's experienced that. I think the most frequent tactics that we've seen for landlords who are trying to get tenants out is first, and not if any of this sounds familiar, using construction in a building to try to make the conditions really unpleasant or unlivable in order to pressure tenants into either leaving their apartments or signing a surrender agreement. As Jenny mentioned, filing frivolous lawsuits against tenants to try to pressure them to give up their apartments. In some cases we've actually heard tenants say, I keep sending my checks in, they don't deposit my checks, they say they lost my checks, they say I didn't receive them. Now I have to send them in by certified mail and they're still not depositing them, and then lo and behold, they sue me for non-payment. Now, of course, you may be able to document that you paid it, but it's still difficult to have to go to court. You have to miss work. You may not have a lawyer who can help you. So we consider that a form of harassment. We've also seen landlords bringing frivolous holdover cases against tenants where they say, you don't live there, you live at some other address, your name is, Jose Diaz, and we found another Jose Diaz who lives in Puerto Rico, so you must live in Puerto Rico. We've seen cases like that. And then you, of course, have to go, and the burden falls on you to prove that you actually live in the apartment. Finally, we've seen cases where landlords have hired private investigators or other real estate agents, tenant relocators, who try to pressure tenants into accepting surrender agreements or giving up their apartments. And we've seen a variety of tactics that these people use, often a combination of threats, deception, and intimidation to get tenants out. So, for example, they might question tenants about their immigration status and imply that they're not entitled to their apartment if they're undocumented, which is not true. Or they'll tell the tenant that the landlord's going to sue them, or tell the tenant that the landlord is going to do a lot of construction on the building and it's going to be really unpleasant to live there. All sorts of things to make tenants feel like
as well. And thank you to Kalante for organizing this event and inviting us to speak today. So my name is Brooke Davis. I'm the legal director of the Tenant Protection Unit. We are the new kids on the block. The governor created the Tenant Protection Unit 3 years ago, and he created the Tenant Protection Unit to preserve New York State's regulated housing, rent-regulated housing. The state can also proactively enforce the rent regulation laws, right? There's numerous tenants that live in rent-regulated housing. They may not know that they're rent-regulated. They may not know what they're entitled to, and they may also be abused by their landlords and not know what avenues are there. We're there to proactively enforce the law. So we've grown in the 3 years. It originally started with Deputy Commissioner Richard White, who's in the audience today, and he basically staffed up. So we grew from a staff of 1 to a staff of about 25. I like to say we're incredibly small, but we're also incredibly scrappy. So we try to make our 25 people feel like 100 if we're able to. So when Deputy Commissioner Richard White started and he hired up, he's like, well, now what do we do? And he met with a lot of the tenant organizations and tenant advocacy groups and said, what are some of the problems, and let's figure out a way if we're able to address them. So one of the things that we happened was we knew that some of the landlords weren't registering their buildings, right?
Yes.
Right, big problem. So sometimes the landlords are like, well, I'm rent regulated, but if I don't register, maybe they won't know about it. Well, we found out about it, okay? So we created an initiative where we got the landlords to re-register their units. And by doing that, we were able to bring back 40,000 units back into the rent regulation system. So these were buildings that may not have been under, or we may not have known about because they weren't registering, or the tenants may not known about that they're rent regulated, and we brought them back. We'd like to say we've reached out and touched the landlords, right? Brought them back into the system. The other thing that we were hearing about from the tenant advocacy groups was the rent is too high, right? And if the rent is legal, the rent is legal. But what we were hearing is that there's a certain thing called an apartment improvement, an IAI, individual apartment improvement, right? So this is the landlords, a tenant moves out, they're able to get a bump in rent, like 17%, 20%, plus they're also able to get what's called these individual apartment improvements, okay? And an individual apartment improvement is I put in a new stove, I put in a new refrigerator, I got renovated the whole kitchen, I did all this stuff, right? But the advocates told us, they're like, well, they may have put in a new stove, but they put in, like what I have, a $300 GE stove, and they put in the $5,000 Viking stove, right? But they're charging the tenant for the $5,000 Viking stove. Or maybe they just said they put in a brand new bathtub, but they just reglazed it, right? And they can't get all that money. So we started auditing the landlords. We started saying, if you put in all those increases, show us. Prove it to us that you put in all that amount of money. And if not, there's going to be consequences, right? So then the advocate said, so you're going to audit all these apartments that rent has gone up significantly. What are you going to do with your audits? Are you just going to do a report that's going to have no teeth to it, or are you going to do something else, right? And we said, well, we can't do something that's not going to have any teeth. No one's going to like that. We're not going to like that. So we gave the landlords an opportunity to pay back the tenant any amount that they're overcharging the tenant, give the tenant a new lease, and also re-register for the correct amount of rent to us, okay? And then if you don't do that, if you're not willing to take it the kind of
The high road.
the high road, or take the offer you can't refuse type of thing, right? We're going to actually file a complaint with ORA, an overcharge complaint. So the tenant may not even know that they're being overcharged, but we're going to file a complaint on that tenant's behalf. And in doing so, we returned, and Richard, I'm not even the number that we were able to return to tenants.
We're well over $1 million to tenants who didn't know that they were being overcharged. So you just get a check in the mail that says, on behalf of Governor Cuomo and the Tenant Protection Unit, you were paying too much rent, and here's a refund. Never done in the history of New York State under the actions of Brooke and
So we like to say that in some way it's a tenant equivalent of like the Publishers Clearinghouse, right? Is that
Cool.
someone shows up and you're getting a check that you didn't even know that you were necessarily entitled to, and from then on your rent is lower. And this is so incredibly important because it's not only protecting the tenant that is there in place, but it brings back integrity to the system because it's lowering the rent for that next tenant as well, and is fighting some of that fraud and abuse that was happening. They know that there's someone that is now watching them. Okay? And then the other thing that we're doing is that there's all this tenant harassment that is out there. And when I came on board, I was prior at the Attorney General's office, working in the same bureau as Jessica. I had the pleasure of doing that. And Richard moved me away by saying we have subpoena power. I said,
Oh,
what?
that's nice.
We have subpoena power, and it hasn't been used. You want to come on board and start using some subpoena power and protecting the rights of tenants. So what does that mean? Okay. We know that we'll get complaint from Palante, we'll get a complaint from some of the tenant advocacy groups that there's problems in these buildings. Okay? So we know if there's a problem in one building, and we'll go out and meet tenants, and Pedro, who's also in the audience, Pedro Rivera, who's one of the attorneys in the legal unit, we make house calls. Okay? We're unlike doctors, we actually make house calls and we go into the community and figure out if there is a problem. We think that's what being good government is. So we go out in the community, we meet the tenants, we figure out if there is some type of harassment that is taking place there. We're fortunate enough to have a former NYPD on staff, and we have computer database people that know how to run searches and all that stuff that, quite frankly, I have no idea what they do, but they're able to get us the information that we need. And they're able to go out and figure out whether buildings that they own and some of the problems that may be there. But what we also do is with this subpoena power is that we ask the landlord to tell us all about all of their buildings that they own, right? So we know that some of your buildings may live at, I always give the address I grew up in, 14737 Roosevelt Avenue, Flushing. They may also own 8929 39th Street LLC, but they all have these separate LLCs and no one knows what other properties they have, right? They may have a giant landlord behind them, but the tenants who are in these buildings don't know. Okay? So with this subpoena power, we're able to go out and say, hey, what are your buildings? What are you doing? Okay? And with that, we were able to enter into certain settlements with landlords once we were able to get back the documents without doing lots of lengthy litigation that could be tied up in the courts for several years. One of those cases, we worked very closely with an organization called Flatbush Tenants Coalition, and it was a landlord that I think exemplifies some of the harassment that Jessica was talking about, what they were doing. They bought all these buildings in this gentrifying area of Crown Heights in Brooklyn, which is pretty hot right now. And they started saying to the tenants, I'm not going to accept your rent, it's not your primary residence, I'm not going to cash your rent checks, and bring all these tenants into housing court when they've been there for 25 years with no problems before them in paying their rent, right? No one should have to live like that. No one should have that threat of eviction if they're doing the right thing and paying the rent and doing what they need to do. So we stepped in and were able to enter into a comprehensive settlement with them where there's in place an independent monitor who's a place for tenants to complain to if there's any problems. They had to redo all of their policies and procedures, which is subject to our approval, and also compensate any of the tenants that have been harmed as well. We had another case in Harlem area where the landlord was asking tenants for their social security numbers or saying, hey, you know what, you look Mexican, I don't think you're documented, you know, there may be repercussions. We stepped in and said, I'll take questions at the end, that's not lawful, and if you're doing that, you're going to be penalized as well. And then some of the other things that we were able to do were some of the swift actions. We had one landlord out in the Brighton Beach area of Brooklyn where they weren't giving any of the tenants renewal leases. Our attorneys went out in a sweep at night. Like I said, we do house calls and met with the tenants in the lobby, and the landlord's management company showed up. We hit them with a cease and desist letter and said, you're going to give them all renewal leases, aren't you? And here's the law, let me pull it up on my cell phone for you. And they did, and all of the tenants were able to get leases very quickly. So I'll tell you very quickly about the types of cases that we do. We only do larger class action-y type of cases, the ones that impact numerous tenants. So if it's you and your neighbors, it's not that the landlord has an individual beef with one person. If it's a one-person type of case, our Office of Rent Administration, which is for rent regulated tenants, you can file an individual complaint there as well to get that relief. Okay. And lastly, you know, feel free to reach out to us. There's some handouts back there about what we do. We tell you a little bit more information, but we're also working in partnership with the Attorney General's office and HPD, which people go to if there's problems with maintenance. We know now that working, all can't work in silos, and some of these landlords, there's a violation of many different laws that we all have jurisdiction over, right? The building may be going to crap with all the repairs, everything needs to be done, and that's HPD. There may be some discrimination aspect of it, and there also may be abuse of rent-regulated tenants. So within partnership, we're able to in some way increase, we always like to talk about our hammer, like Thor in some ways. We like to increase our hammer and make it as big as possible, and that's what we're doing. You may have heard of one case where we worked with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office, where there was arrest of landlords in Brooklyn, where they were destroying all the buildings, systems, and tenants had no heat, giant holes in the floor, and the complete destruction, where those landlords were arrested as well. So it's another example of us trying to increase that hammer. But if you have any questions, come find me after as well, but there's some handles. Thank you.
I just want to break up another form of harassment is when landlords call ACS. That is a lot. HPD has said that is a common practice. That has happened to me because the landlord had a numerous amount of violations. ACS, as a matter of fact, I recorded it and put it on Facebook. The ACS worker came and was questioning me about the violations. She had like 40 violations. We've been going back and forth in court. This landlord owned numerous buildings and houses, and they.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry. This is about housing. This is yes. It is about housing. Thank you for listening.
Thank you. There's a woman who's had her hand up in the back.
Sorry, yes, I just want to ask several questions. I'll make it real quick. How many people would you consider as a group? That's one question. When you want to represent them, how many people is the group?
Well, I don't want to speak for Brooke, but my office only has jurisdiction when there's a pattern of conduct. So I can't tell you a specific number, but we have to see repeated acts of illegality directed at more than a couple of tenants, I would say. But I think it's a case by case.
1420. 4-20 is in between Fifth Avenue and Madison. Okay? The other one is between Madison and Lenox. Okay? But they all cover 117th Street.
Okay. We'll start taking a look.
Yeah, because it's just
try to see what's going on.
Yeah, because there's so much fraud, and then next they charge people, you know, like what? It was supposed to go according to your income, right? 30% of your income,
Okay.
right? They doing 60%, 70%, and you don't have it. I mean, it like I get a check from the VA.
You know what? Why don't we? Because there's other
Okay.
people here that.
All right. Can I get your card or whatever?
Sure.
Okay.
Absolutely. There's other people here that have questions. So
Okay.
Let's try to keep it brief. It's almost lunchtime, and you know people are probably hungry and it's been lunch. So we'll keep it brief so we can get to people. How about we take the last 3 questions here? Okay.
You said build more than one tenant, basically. So in my building, I live in a rent stabilized building, and I've been there probably about 30 years. As at least 30 to 40% of the tenants, it's about 60 units. Long story short, in the time that I've been there, the building has gone through MCIs. It's gone through renovations, and of course, each time we get the stove, we get an increase in rent. And they have asked for your financial information, and I've never given it. This time around, they want your financial information. They want people to sign up through them for Section 8, and for some reason, the paperwork that we're getting from HPD no longer states rent stabilization. It says you have an option of being a Section 8 tenant or a preferred renter. As a preferred renter, you get to pay 30% of your household income. So my question has been, what happened to rent stabilization? How do you take that from the tenants?
Yeah, I think there's your building. It sounds like, without knowing more, that there's other government programs that fits into, and other subsidies. So I apologize, but I'm going to say your situation is complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated.
So I'm not, hold on.
It's okay.
But why don't we have you reach out to us during the week, because I think we have a lot more questions.
Yeah, just give me your contact information, because I trust me, I have stuff that I can fax you that will give you details and allow you to kind of take a look at the situation and get back to us.
I think we need to figure out what type of program your building is in.
Well, the bottom line is, it's a way of
gentrifying
gentrifying and pushing out 80-year-old tenants and people out of a situation that, you know, why do you work and take care of an apartment just to have it pulled from under you?
No, I got you, but we're going to talk, or you're going to talk more. Let's figure out what's going on.
I wonder about the form of harassment. In our building, we have people who are musicians who walk on hours. A lot of loud music or other kind of, people have been throwing furniture around. I'm not throwing furniture every night and singing some crazy song, always the same thing, and I could not sleep. And there are many tenants in my building who have patterns where they cannot sleep for weeks, months, and years because of it. Persistent, loud.
Unfortunately, we don't enforce. There is a code that regulates excessive noise, but we don't personally enforce that. So what you would have to do is call 311 and make a noise complaint, and then they should investigate it. But from my own personal experience, having lived in a similar building, I can tell you that you may have to call, repeatedly, because when they come out, it might not, their noise might not be there, and you might want to encourage the other tenants in your building to call if they're running into the same
calls
issue.
that be just as persistent
Yo quiero saber legalmente cuántas veces se debe de llevar un accionista o accionitas a la corte para que lo resuelvan.
Legally speaking, how many times can you take the showholder to court so they can pay their rent? Para que paguen la renta.
Sí.
Showholder.
Shareholder.
¿Usted vio un edificio aquí?
No.
HDFC. So you live in an HDFC building.
And you're a shareholder, so it's not rent regulated? Yeah,
So
so yeah,
no
it's
renta
a
regulada.
Tenemos renta regulada, vamos a decir, fija, que es de nosotros.
Other shareholder.
Yeah, so.
Sí, a otro.
It's another shareholder in
Okay.
the same building.
So it's a co-op building, and I only deal with the apartments that are rent regulated where there's tenants, not co-ops. So I'm actually going to punt this question to Jenny.
So are you saying that they're suing for rent when you don't owe the rent?
When they owe.
Oh, well, if someone owes in a co-op, the management can sue whenever rent is owed or maintenance is owed.
Sí, pero se ha llevado varias veces.
Yeah, we take it in multiple times.
Ajá, entonces resuelven el problema
Then everything gets resolved in court.
porque eso pasa cada 3 meses.
It happens every 3 months. I guess she has a tenant that doesn't pay the rent in 3 months.
Yeah,
They
so
take it to
that's
court.
a different workshop.
It's a workshop
Sorry.
different.
Yeah, I know there are people who deal with those issues here at this conference, but not the three of us.
¿Cuándo tendremos ese webinar?
Yo no dejo de reportar.
Oh, okay, no problem.
So when I do know when that
Yeah, I
will be
think
filed.
there's a list out in the hall.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. We greatly appreciate it. There are some flyers in the back with information regarding TDU, and it also has our contact information. Not there, I have some more.